So I think one thing is carving out enough time for you to really focus and do the deep, deep work to make you competent and good at what you do.
Okay, so I'm reading between the lines. Does this mean I have to say no?
You have to say no. You have to say no.
Why did I bring you on this show today?
Exactly.
This is a major mistake.
Tim Ferriss, I'm a big fan of podcasts, as you know, and that's why I'm here today. One thing Tim Ferriss says is he makes a choice between either do I want to really say, like, hell yes, I really want to do this, or not really. And he only does things that he really, really wants to do. And that might be a good way for you to sort out the things that are super important and things that aren't.
Okay, all right. So I'm gonna stay on this for a minute because here's a common challenge I've got. In fact, I taught a class last week on how do you get recognized as a high potential, and this was for full-time MBAs.
Right.
And the common consensus amongst a panel of HR leaders that came on was they said in the beginning of your time in a new role or job, you say yes to everything, right? So so we're getting this little
Sure.
It gets harder.
Sure.
Tim Ferriss has already kind of gotten to the Tim Ferriss level, so now he's like, well, I don't need to do that because I'm Tim Ferriss. I don't think I'm quite there.
No, I think you're probably pretty close to there. But I think the point is also that you talk about relational equity on your blog and on your website. When you first join an organization or join a church or join anything, even a neighborhood HOA, you have zero relational equity. So let's make sure that you're getting deposits. And actually, in The Godfather, they talk about a favor as a debt uncollected.
Yeah.
Right? So when you first join, you're really not in a position to say what you're going to do and not do. But that said, second thing about strategy, so the first one is basically make sure that you carve enough time out to really focus on the things that are important and say no when you have to. But the second one, too, is I think strategy is long-term. So whenever you hear a company say, oh, the strategy for this year is A, B, and C, that's not a strategy. That's a tactic.
Oh.
Okay?
Oh.
So when you think about strategy, you're making tough decisions a lot of time that you can't even reverse. You started this podcast, you're going to do this podcast. That's a strategy. You're going to do it for 5 years, right? You're not changing your mind all the time. So strategy is definitely long-term. So I think that's very helpful too.
Okay, so all right. Okay, so the first one is saying knowing what you're not going to do.
Yep.
Can you think of an example of since I'm gonna put your faculty hat on for a minute. You think of an organization, firm, or company that does a good job of saying no. Is there one that comes to mind for you that you're like, wow, if you want an example, lift up this company.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think it's harder and harder to find now than in the past.
Yeah.
I guess we're in Atlanta, so the first one obviously would be Chick-fil-A, where one of us had probably ate over the last week. They say no to opening up on Sundays.
Yeah.
I remember one time Warren Buffett was actually considering investing in Chick-fil-A, and one of the questions, obviously he ended up not, but one of the questions that Chick-fil-A actually had to Warren Buffett was, are you okay with us, not being open on Sunday? And he said, well, if you sell as much chicken as you do now, I don't care if you close on Saturday too.
Yeah. And I love that as an example because they're number one in revenue per store in the quick service restaurant industry, and they're only open 6 days a week.
Right.
So it's not an issue for them, but it's not a very intuitive decision.
Sure.
Because they'll tell you that Sundays are the most profitable restaurant days or revenue producing days of the week. People go out to lunch or dinner on Sundays.
I think that's probably good because now that we're talking and I actually had some coffee, that I'm starting to feeling about the third point I would probably say is that strategy is a lot about being different. So, in that HR example, you just joined a company, or do you really want to be a troublemaker? Do you really want to say no all the time? Probably not, clearly. But if you think about the strategy for your life over 10 or 15 years, you definitely want to be different.
Yeah.
Because the idea is that in the short term, if I just copy what you're doing well and copy what she's doing well and copy what they're doing well, at the end of the day, you're becoming some kind of Me Too version of that. So your website is going to be Me Too. Your resume is going to be Me Too. Your experience is going to be Me Too. Your stories are going to be Me Too. And, on some level, you can live a really good life, but are you going to be remembered long term? Are you going to put a dent in the universe? That kind of talk. Are you going to leave a legacy? Are people going to drive across town to pay money to hear you talk? Probably not.
Man, this is getting heavy.
Yeah, you're probably not. So that's what strategy is. It's a pretty high bar, I guess is the point.
Okay, so all right, I'm going to add another kind of push on that. So I heard from the panel last week, someone said, and I thought this was an interesting comment, They said, you are a reflection of the 5 people you hang out with the most, which I think is kind of a cool statement. It's like, who do I want to hang out with? Like, but then to your point, it's like, then I don't want to be, how do you balance this?
I perfectly believe that's true, that you are the average of 5 people you spend time with. I think the dark, cynical question is, does that mean you're constantly upgrading your friends? That's a different...
Oh my gosh.
That's a different dark...
Dude, I got to upgrade my friends?
That's a different, darker conversation.
Well, I've really enjoyed spending my time with you, John.
Well, it was a great time, thanks. No, but I think it's kind of true, right? I remember reading somewhere that you are the people you meet and the books that you read. And part of that, I think, has to do with, are you intellectually curious and getting better? The world isn't standing still. And Brandon and I, we're old enough to remember, like, world before the internet. We're actually remembering
I
stuff.
thought you were about to say World War II, and I was going to get a little concerned.
I know. Don't let the white hair fool you. He had that when he was 30 years old, too. It's always been there. But no, I think it's true. I think you are kind of the average of the 5 people you spend time with. And that's one reason for me, I think it's really important to, listen to audiobooks or listen to podcasts. I probably listen to maybe 20 hours of podcasts a week. From Tim Ferriss to James Altucher, Tony Robbins, Dave Ramsey. These are people in the past, you would actually have to pay money to go downtown to hear them speak. Now you can get it for free during your commute. So I really think it's a huge tip that I want to give people.
Okay. All right. So we've talked about saying no. We've talked about kind of this idea of differentiation.
Yeah.
What's maybe another point or takeaway for us?
Around strategy specifically, right?
Yeah. When you think about strategy, you think about how we could apply it to our careers and life. Mm-hmm. What are some other principles? Or another way to look at it too is what's been different. So when I see research and work on strategy today, it's a little different world because of the uncertainty and ambiguity and more difficulty in being able to plan.
Right. No, that's a good point. I think strategy has changed a lot. When you think about, first of all, the practice of strategy, the study of strategy is about 50 years old. They used to just call it management. So versus other fields, it's actually newer. That said, when you think about strategy from the General Electric days, the 1980s and stuff like that, there was a lot about strategic planning. So you get a lot of executives, they have a 3-day offsite, they have a facilitator, a lot of Post-it notes, and they put together a binder that's so big you can't even carry it, right? And then they don't look at it during the year. Well, like you said, things are changing so much that I think one way to think about strategy, especially as it reflects to your own life, is if you're 25 years old, don't try to come together with the perfect plan that you're going to follow for 40 years. That's foolish. Instead, think about what are you trying to achieve, and then also are you learning how to learn? Are you thinking about thinking? The big kind of GMAT word is metacognition, right?
Hold on, what now? Can you say that again?
Don't try to spell it, but it's thinking about thinking.
Metacognition.
Yeah, thinking about thinking.
Thinking about that's a little heavy, man.
Let's watch him think about that.
Ooh.
No, but the idea is that do you have a learning organization? Are you yourself learning? Are you getting better? Do you know what's important, not important? These are skills and capabilities that even if you don't have a perfect plan today, if you have that skill set and you're able to do that, that's going to take you pretty far. So it's really about being flexible and being able to get better.
Okay, so I want to add what I've seen in this and have you help me kind of clarify it a little bit. So before 2008, people still did the strategic planning deal, right? And they would set strategies, 5-year strategies, 10-year strategies. Now, I rarely see strategies go beyond 3 years if I'm working with a company, for example. And I hear more and more discussion, or whether people call it this or not, more of an appetite towards scenario planning versus strategic planning.
Yeah, like it.
So from what I understand scenario planning to be, and you can clarify this, it's essentially rather than saying, this is what we're going to do, it's kind of like, if these things happen, then this is what we're going to do. However, these other things could happen too, and then we're going to do this other thing.
That's great.
Right? So, for example, we might apply to, if we went back in the day, we're going to apply to business school. If we applied to Emory and we got in, then we would go. If we didn't get in, then we might wait another year, or we might apply to another school, whatever happened to be. So what's your thought about, is that how we should be thinking about things?
I think it makes a lot of sense. right? So you're thinking, like, pretend you're playing chess. You're not just moving one move ahead, but if I move that far, what are my next couple of options? So it's nice that you're actually thinking ahead. That's good. And number two, as you know, if you can work, a lot of the work we do nowadays is in teams, right? So you have a team of people to help you to do this. You have if you have those kind of scenario planning and you work in a team kind of based environment and you let your team know what you're doing, they may come up with ideas way better than you would come up with yourself, right? So I think that's really important too. And then finally, I think this is something that I think companies want to do more of is don't overfund something. Pilot